After 5 consecutive days of watching over my daughter at the hospital, the custodian, Mr. Hogan, suddenly appeared and whispered, "Starting tomorrow, ma'am, you shouldn't be the one watching your daughter anymore. Let me show you something." I was shocked by what I saw. Hello, friends. I hope we are all in good health. Before we continue the story, please help this channel grow by liking, subscribing, and commenting on where you are listening from. If you've done that, let's begin the story. 5 days, 5 nights, without going home, without proper sleep, without even feeling the warmth of a shower. I had even forgotten what it felt like to close my eyes without the soft, incessant beep of the monitor next to the small bed where my daughter Riley lay. She was still lying there, a small IV tube in her arm. Her breathing was sometimes shallow and ragged, as if she were struggling to find a new rhythm that, for some reason, would never stabilize. The dim lighting of the pediatric ward made everything feel even more oppressive. It was late, but exhaustion and fear had blended into a single emotion I could no longer distinguish. I sat in the cold metal chair that, since the first day, felt like it had molded itself to my body. My eyes began to burn. The back of my neck felt hot, and the tips of my fingers were numb. Just as I was about to drift off, my phone vibrated softly. It was Jared calling. "Honey, are you holding up?" he asked. His voice was casual, as if he were calling from an air-conditioned office. "I'm in a big meeting, can't visit yet. If you need anything, just use my card, okay?" The card. The one that was always maxed out. The one whose bills I always paid off with my own savings. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see my face. "Yes, it's fine. You just focus on work." After the call ended, I looked at Riley's small hand. It was pale and cold. That child had never been a burden to anyone, never been seriously ill, never been fussy. And now, all I could do was wait, trying to guess what was causing her condition to worsen with each passing day. The sound of soft footsteps approached. Mr. Hogan, the custodian who often greeted me politely while mopping the floors or carrying away medical waste bags, appeared at the door. His expression tonight was different, tense, as if he had just seen something he couldn't ignore. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice lowered to almost a whisper, "starting tomorrow, you shouldn't be the one watching your daughter in this room." I was instantly wide awake. "What do you mean, sir?" He glanced left and right, making sure no one was watching. "Come with me for a moment. I need to show you something, but you have to be strong." There was something in his gaze that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the look of a prankster, nor of someone looking to cause trouble. It was the look of a person who knew something far darker than I could ever imagine. I stood up slowly, patting Riley's shoulder. "Just a minute, sweetie. Mommy's not going far." We walked down the nearly empty hospital corridors. The pale fluorescent lights made our shadows stretch long against the walls. The hum of the AC, the sound of our footsteps, and the beat of my own heart began to race against each other. Mr. Hogan unlocked a small door marked "Staff Only." Inside was a cramped room with several CCTV monitors. Without saying much, he grabbed a mouse and pulled up the recordings from the last 2 nights. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Don't be shocked, ma'am," he said. I nodded, though my heart was already pounding against my ribs. A few seconds after the recording started, my breath caught in my throat. On the left screen, the hallway near the pharmacy was visible. Around midnight, a man was standing there, holding something that looked like a brown envelope. That man was my husband, Jared. I took a half step back. That's my husband. Mr. Hogan paused the recording, then fast-forwarded slightly. Jared was seen talking to someone, a figure in a white doctor's coat and glasses, Dr. Kane. I held my breath as the video was paused at the exact moment Jared shook the doctor's hand, passing him the thick envelope. On another screen, a nurse was shown changing the label on an IV bag. She laughed softly, whispering something to a colleague. "If you do it slowly, it'll just look like a typical complication." My cry felt stuck in my throat, a suffocating weight. "No, it can't be. Jared, what is this, sir?" My voice broke. "What does this mean?" Mr. Hogan looked at me with a strange sadness, like someone who had felt the same wound. "Ma'am, this pattern, it's not the first time I've seen it." He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. My son was treated here once, and the nights before his complications started, the recordings were similar. The same person, the same doctor, the same method. My eyes burned. My whole body was trembling, and I couldn't stop it. Mrs. Miller, starting tomorrow, you shouldn't be the one watching your daughter in this room. They think you don't know anything. They think you're just a stay-at-home mom. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. I saved a copy, ma'am, but if we make a wrong move, I could be fired, or worse. He looked at me sharply. Do you have anyone you can trust? Besides your husband? A name suddenly appeared in my head like a small light in a dark room. The name written in the faded folder from my father's estate, Arvel Kane. A name I had only glanced at before, never realizing it would become my only hope on this darkest of nights. Arvel. I stared at the CCTV screen, still frozen on the image of my husband handing an envelope to the doctor responsible for my daughter's life, and in that second, my entire world felt like it was cracking apart. This fifth night was no longer about watching over a sick child. This was the night all the pieces of the truth began to reveal themselves, and they were all far more terrifying than my worst nightmares. Just as I was about to ask another question, one of the screens showed another figure approaching Riley's room, a nurse carrying a tray of medication I had never seen before. The nurse on the screen paused in front of Riley's door. Her hand knocked softly, but she didn't enter. She just glanced left and right, then lowered the tray and opened a small notepad tucked in her pocket. I instinctively grabbed Mr. Hogan's arm. Sir, that medicine, it's not the usual kind, is it? He shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. And I've seen them switch labels like that many times. As the nurse stepped into Riley's room, the camera showed a small corner of my daughter's bed where she looked so fragile. From a distance, I could see the nurse expertly switching the IV label as if it were a routine task. Then she chuckled softly and said to a passing colleague, her words barely audible, "If you do it slow like this, they'll just think it's a complication." My chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. I bent over, covering my mouth with both hands to keep from sobbing out loud. My tears fell, wetting the back of my hands. But that voice, those words, just a complication spoken so lightly, as if my daughter's life were just part of some medical game. Mr. Hogan stopped the recording and played another. This time, the date was from 2 nights before. In a deserted hallway in the early morning hours, Jared stood under a dim light. He looked anxious, glancing at his phone every few seconds. Then, Dr. Kane appeared from the end of the hall. The recording amplified their voices, bit by bit. "I need assurance, doctor," Jared said. His tone wasn't that of a worried father. It was the tone of a man demanding the completion of a transaction. Dr. Kane closed the back door to the pharmacy, checking his surroundings. "Calm down, sir. Everything has to look natural. Don't make things difficult for me." Jared moved closer, slipping a thick envelope into the doctor's hand. "I need to benefit from this, Doc. The policy on the kid is huge. And, well, you know, she has to look like her condition is naturally worsening." I staggered backward, grabbing a chair to keep from falling. The kid, he called Riley the kid, not our daughter, his own flesh and blood, the tiny body he had held with such pride when she was born. I bit my lip until it stung, trying not to scream. The words on that recording replayed every act of kindness I had ever shown him, every sacrifice that now seemed pathetic compared to his vile ambition. I covered my face with my hands, but Mr. Hogan continued, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, I understand this is hard, but you need to know something." He stopped the recording and switched to another file. "My son died in this hospital." I turned quickly, tears blurring my vision. "I also stayed up for 5 nights back then," he said softly. "I trusted the doctors, but suddenly they said his condition deteriorated rapidly. Complications. Exactly what that nurse just said." He looked down. "I only realized it after my son was gone. The policy was large. The method was the same. The doctor was the same. The room felt like it was shrinking, swallowing me whole. There are 3 other cases I suspected, ma'am, but back then, it was just suspicion. No proof." His eyes met mine, sharp and filled with a determination that pierced me to the bone. But you have proof this recording, and you still have a child you can save. I wiped my face, trying to catch my breath. Sir, if Jared is really involved, if he really... I couldn't finish the sentence. Mr. Hogan took a long breath. Ma'am, this isn't about whether it's true or not. This is about them already making their move, and you have to be faster. He picked up the USB drive from the small table. It was small, light, but it felt like a time bomb in my hand when he gave it to me. Keep this, ma'am. Don't tell anyone, especially not your husband. If you're careless, you and I could be finished. I stared at the small object, my hand shaking. Sir, what should I do? I don't have anyone. He looked at me for a long moment. You mentioned your father's name once, Roger Arden, right? I nodded slowly. He used to help a health foundation that partnered with this hospital, he continued. His people are still around. One of them, I remember, was named Arvell Kane. I was stunned. That name, the name that had emerged from the folds of my father's old file, the name I had seen when I was too young to understand how important someone like that could be. Do you still have his contact information at home? He asked. I do, I answered, almost in a whisper. Mr. Hogan placed a hand on my shoulder, a grip that was firm yet protective. Tomorrow, Riley's condition could be more dangerous if they see you're starting to get suspicious. I suggest you pretend a little. Don't show any change in your behavior. Act like a submissive wife who doesn't know anything. I swallowed hard. I don't know if I can do that. He looked me straight in the eye, his voice hoarse from holding back his own emotions. You have to, because your daughter's life depends on what you do tonight. I covered my mouth, my shoulders shaking softly. This was no longer just a suspicion. This was no longer the exhaustion of a mother watching over her sick child. This was war, a war I never thought I would have to fight. I clutched the USB drive tightly and then nodded. Sir, thank you, I managed to say, my voice barely audible. Thank you for saving my daughter. He gave a weak smile. Save her first, ma'am. Then we can talk about exposing all of this. I glanced one last time at the CCTV monitor. As the recording played on fast forward, Jared's figure seemed to turn toward the camera as if he were looking right at me. I looked away, fighting the tightness in my chest. For the first time since we were married, I was truly afraid of my own husband. And as we left the CCTV room, another nurse crossed the hallway, giving me a strange look before quickly turning away, as if hiding something I wasn't supposed to see. That nurse passed quickly, but her glance left an unsettling feeling that clung to my back, as if there were more eyes watching from behind every door, every curtain, every corner of this hospital. I hugged myself as I walked back to Riley's room, hiding the small USB drive in my fist. Once inside, the dim light greeted me. Only the sound of the monitor, tracking that small heartbeat, filled the silence. I went closer and held Riley's hand. It was cold, but a little more stable than it had been that afternoon. "Mama," she whispered, barely audible. I forced a small smile, holding back my tears so they wouldn't fall. "I'm here, sweetie. I'm not going anywhere." After a few minutes of making sure she was asleep again, I sat in the corner of the room and opened the faded folder I had brought 2 days ago. I had kept it in a closet at home for years, never truly opening it until tonight. Inside were photocopies of a deed, an education policy, a few of my father's notes, and one worn business card that read, Arvell Kane, financial and legal advisor to the Arden family. I touched the words slowly, and suddenly a memory from my past pulled me back to a morning just after Jared and I were married. "Your father is too suspicious of my family," Jared had once said, laughing lightly as he sipped the coffee my mother had made. "Well, you know how the older generation is, always making things complicated." At the time, I just smiled, thinking it was a joke, but after my father passed away, Jared started commenting more frequently on small things. "Why does Riley's education policy have to be in her name directly? Why can't I access it? That small inheritance from your father is for the family. Why does it need all this protection?" I was never suspicious. To me, protecting my family meant trusting my husband. Even when I secretly paid off 2 months of his overdue car payments, I just thought that was part of married life. "Felicity, why are you using your money for that?" The car repairs are Jared's responsibility, my friend Tessa had said one day when I admitted to paying the bill. He's under a lot of pressure at work. I'm just helping him out for now, I had replied lightly. I also remembered the day my mother-in-law, Sandra, called, her voice trembling as she begged for help. Felicity, your brother-in-law has gambling debts. They're going to foreclose on the house. Please, help us just this once. You've always been so good to the family. I sent the money without asking any questions, and when the paid-in-full receipt arrived, Jared smiled proudly and said, "Thanks, honey. You make me look great in front of my family." Great in front of his family. Not in front of me, not in front of our daughter. That night, I sat in the small hospital chapel, looking at the folder now open on my lap. For the first time, I saw how heavy the burden I had been carrying alone truly was, without it ever being called a struggle. Instead, I was always told, "You're just a stay-at-home mom. Just follow your husband. You have an easy life, just staying home." But secretly, I was the one paying off his credit cards. I was the one paying for my mother-in-law's medication. I was the one patching up all the financial leaks they created. I looked up at the chapel ceiling, trying to steady my breathing. My father wasn't a rich man, but he was a very cautious one. All the documents he had arranged were not without reason. I opened a small, handwritten note from him. "If something happens to my granddaughter, Felicity, never let your husband's side of the family manage things on their own. There is an additional clause in the policy. Contact Arvel." My hands trembled. Dad, it was as if he knew, long before I did. I looked back at the folder. There was another document, the education policy I had signed when Riley was born. At the bottom, it read, "The right to request a special investigation is the sole and absolute right of the bloodhair Felicity Arden." So, I was the only one who had the right to request an investigation if there were signs of medical malpractice. That meant if Jared wanted that large policy to pay out, Riley's condition had to look completely natural, with no criminal loopholes. They needed my ignorance. They needed me to appear unaware of what they were doing. And Mr. Hogan was right. If I changed my behavior, they might accelerate their plan. I covered my mouth, holding back a gasp. I hugged the folder as if I were hugging my father one last time. I had to move, had to report this, had to find help. With trembling hands, I opened my phone. My fingers typed a message to the number on Arvel Kane's business card. "This is Roger Arden's daughter. I need help. It's about the life of your client's granddaughter." I sent the message. I prayed it would get through, that the number was still active. When I returned to Riley's room, the hallway seemed much darker than before, and as I opened the door, I froze. The nurse I had seen earlier in the hallway was standing in the corner of the room, checking the medical chart while glancing at me. Her gaze wasn't professional, nor was it caring. It was a look of assessment, as if to confirm whether I was still oblivious. I tried to force a small, tired, submissive smile. "Thank you for checking on my daughter." She returned a thin smile, one that felt like it was hiding something. Then she left, not closing the door completely. A chill ran down my spine, and as I closed the door, my phone buzzed. It wasn't from Jared, not from my mother-in-law, but from an unknown number, the number I had just messaged 2 minutes ago. The text contained only one sentence. "Where are you? I am on my way." My heart pounded against my chest. So fast, too fast for an ordinary person, but my father had once said that Arvel was someone who worked before he was even asked. I looked at Riley, who was stirring restlessly in her sleep. The monitor showed her heart rate fluctuating, as if her small body were fighting something unseen. "Hold on, sweetie," I whispered, stroking her hair. "Mommy has called the right person." Not even 30 minutes later, someone knocked on the door, a soft but firm sound. "Mrs. Miller?" I opened the door, and a man in his 40s stood before me. He was well-dressed, with a calm face but sharp eyes, as if he could read the entire room with a single glance. "Arvel Kane?" I asked, my voice a near whisper. He nodded, showing me his ID card. "Your father instructed me to come whenever your family needed urgent help. I believe this is that time." I ushered him inside and quickly closed the door. "Sir, I don't know where to begin." He looked at me with an empathy that wasn't feigned. "Let's start with what you know and what I need to know before your daughter's life is in real danger." His voice was so steady, like an anchor that brought back a sliver of my sanity. I handed him the USB drive from Mr. Hogan. "This is the recording. Please, watch it." Arvel turned on a slim laptop he had brought. The small screen played back everything that had shattered my heart that night. Jared's hand passing the envelope, his whispered words about the policy, the nurse changing the IV label while joking about complications. Arvel watched without interrupting, without any dramatic reaction. Only his eyes hardened slightly, just a little. When the recording reached its worst part, he finally spoke. "This is evidence of a severe medical conspiracy. The intent is clear, the pattern is clear, and the goal is more than just money." I hugged myself. "Sir, they don't just want the money. They want—" Riley gone. He didn't deny it, didn't try to soften the blow. He just looked at me directly, not as a client, but as a mother standing on the most fragile edge of her life. "That's why we have to do two things," he said. "One, stop their medication game tonight. Two, lock down all legal access to the policy and inheritance so they can't make a move." I swallowed hard. "Sir, how?" Arvel opened his briefcase and took out a stack of documents. "Riley's education policy has a special protection clause. Your father put in a bypass route. The moment there's a criminal indication, only you, not your husband, can request an investigation," he continued. "And if you activate it, all claims will be frozen until the legal process is complete." "So, Jared won't get anything?" I asked slowly. Arvel gave a thin smile. "Not a single cent." I felt a small sense of relief for the first time, but it quickly vanished when the door was knocked again. A young female doctor entered. She seemed a bit nervous, holding a medical tablet. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Dr. Nyla. I'm a new pediatric resident on this floor." I recognized her face. She was the doctor who always walked by quickly, offering a polite smile but rarely speaking to anyone. "Is there something I can help you with, doctor?" I asked quietly. She looked at me, then at Arvel, and then closed the door. "I need to talk, and I hope you won't misunderstand," she said. Arvel and I exchanged a glance. "I've been reviewing Riley's lab results for the past 2 days," Dr. Nyla said. "There's an inconsistency. The medication recorded in the system doesn't match her blood samples." I gasped. "The medicine was changed," she nodded. "And that's impossible to do without a senior doctor's approval. I've tried to confirm with Dr. Kane, but he always refuses to show me his manual records." Arvel took a half step forward. "Doctor, are you willing to testify?" Dr. Nyla paused for a moment, then gave a firm nod. "If it can save this child's life, yes, I am." There is something about the courage of ordinary people that is always more piercing than the speeches of powerful men. Arvel took control of the situation. "All right. Starting tonight, Riley needs to be moved to your supervision, and we need to stop all suspicious regimens. But I'll need an ethical recommendation," Dr. Nyla said. "I'm not the primary attending physician. I'll handle the ethics channel," Arvel replied. "Mrs. Miller already has a strong legal basis." I looked at both of them, and it felt like the ground that had been crumbling beneath me was finally finding support. "There's one more thing," Arvel said, looking at me. "You have to pretend you know nothing. If Jared senses even a hint of suspicion, he could accelerate his plan." I took a deep breath. "Okay, I can do that." Dr. Nyla looked at me, seeming hesitant. "Ma'am, this won't be easy. You have to be prepared if Dr. Kane pressures or threatens you." I gave a faint smile. "I'm more than ready." For the first time, I felt something that had been missing from me for so long, a small strength in my chest. Not courage. Courage was too heroic for a situation like this. This was the resolve of a mother who would no longer be treated like a foolish, submissive wife. I stood up, taking a long breath. "Let's do it, doctor," I said. "Fix my daughter's IV tonight." Dr. Nyla nodded and picked up her equipment. She approached the bed, checked the label, and replaced the medication with what it was supposed to be. Everything was done with extreme care. Riley seemed calmer. Her breathing improved slightly. I almost cried. Arvel packed up his documents, then looked at me. "Tomorrow morning, we start the legal process. But tonight, you need to get some rest. You need a clear head." I nodded, though my body was still trembling. As Arvel left the room with Dr. Nyla, I sat back down in that metal chair. I looked at Riley. I held her hand. "Forgive me, sweetie." Mommy was slow to realize, "But I won't be too late to save you." The room's light was dim, the hallway outside quiet. I closed my eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps coming from the door, the sound of heels I knew all too well. I opened my eyes, and Jared was standing in the doorway, no smile, no pleasantries, just staring at me as if he knew something was starting to go off script. Jared's face appeared in the doorway like a shadow I had never invited. He stood there, leaning slightly, his arms folded across his chest, looking at me without a smile, not even bothering with the usual pretense of warmth he used in front of others. "You're still here?" His voice was quiet but cold. "You look a mess, Felicity." I tried to control my breathing, forcing my face to remain submissive. "Well, I haven't been home in 5 days. It's natural I'd look like a mess." He walked in, glancing at Riley as if inspecting damaged goods. "Not a child. Not his own flesh and blood. Her condition isn't really improving, is it?" he muttered. "What did the doctor say?" I swallowed hard. I had to keep playing the part of the clueless wife. "They said she's stable, but needs constant monitoring." Jared snorted. "Stable? She looks weaker." His hand patted my shoulder slowly, but it felt like a threat. "Honey, don't wear yourself out watching her. If you collapse, who's going to take care of the house?" My heart sank. There was no concern, no compassion, only a reminder that I needed to remain functional for his needs. He sat down and rubbed his face for a moment. "I have an important meeting tomorrow. If you're going to stay here, well, I guess I'll have to step up and handle things." "Handle what?" "The hospital arrangements or taking over medical decisions." Before I could ask, the door opened suddenly. Sandra, my mother-in-law, walked in carrying a small bag of fruit. "Oh, Felicity, you're still here too?" Her voice was laced with feigned concern. "Look at you, so disheveled. Don't you feel sorry for your husband? He needs to be taken care of too, you know." I offered a thin smile. "I'm sorry, Sandra. I'm just focused on Riley right now." "Oh, right. Riley," Sandra mumbled, putting on a dramatic expression. "If, God forbid, something were to happen to her, don't blame yourself too much. It's just fate, after all." I tensed. Her gaze flickered. There was a strange glint of relief whenever she mentioned that terrible possibility, as if their minds had already moved far ahead to a world where Riley no longer existed. Jared stood up and put an arm around his mother's shoulder. "Be patient, Mom. Felicity is drained too. Poor thing." He looked at me, then gave a crooked smile. "If you can't handle watching her, just leave it to us." I looked down, pretending to be submissive. Inside, every word they spoke fueled something in my chest, something they had trampled on for years without a second thought. So I played my part perfectly. "I'm sorry. I just want what's best for our daughter." Jared smiled faintly, a look of triumph on his face. "Good. As long as you listen." Sandra came closer and patted my cheek, acting like a loving mother, though I knew those same hands had once calculated the value of Riley's education policy. "Don't you worry, dear. If anything happens, you'll still get a share from my son. You won't end up poor." I smiled a calm, subtle, disguised smile. Inside, I wanted to laugh at their foolishness. Arvel was right. They felt safe. They thought I was still the Felicity they had molded over the last 5 years, the quiet, obedient, trusting wife. Just then, Arvel entered, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a few files. "Excuse me, I'm from the administration office," he said politely. "I need the patient's husband's signature for some data updates." Jared immediately walked over. "Ah, finally. Why hasn't anyone explained this sooner? Where are the documents?" Arvel handed him a blue folder. The neatly partitioned sections looked like standard forms: patient accompaniment, temporary procedure consent, patient condition notification, and, most importantly, designated medical decision-maker. Jared signed everything without reading. "Is that all?" he asked casually. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Sandra even smiled proudly. "My son is always so responsible when it comes to family." I wanted to laugh. With that signature, every medical decision made that night, including those made without my knowledge, became Jared's full responsibility. And all the recorded evidence that would later surface could be pointed directly at him. Every path he had laid to trap me was now closing in on his own neck. Jared put away his pen. Well, I have to go. Lots to do. He and Sandra left the room with satisfied smiles, like people who had just signed off on a successful plan. The door had just closed when Arvel turned to me and gave a small nod. It's done, he said calmly. We have his written admission of responsibility. I took a very deep breath. My legs felt weak. Sir, thank you, I whispered. Not yet, ma'am. This is just the beginning. Arvel glanced at his watch. Tonight, they will likely make their next big move, and we'll be ready. I leaned back in the chair. The hum of the monitor sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something. I stroked Riley's hair again. Just a little longer, sweetie. Just a little longer. As I finally closed my eyes, just for a few seconds, the sound of a rolling cart came from outside the door. I heard nurses whispering. Footsteps stopped right in front of the door, for a long, long time. And when the door opened a crack, I saw not just one nurse, but Dr. Kane, entering slowly, carrying a new tray of medication. The door opened slowly, like a scene from a nightmare suddenly becoming real. Dr. Kane entered silently, followed by a nurse who kept her head bowed excessively. The medication tray in her hands looked neat, too neat, as if prepared for something that could have no margin for error. Well, Mrs. Miller, you're still here, he said with a flat smile. Good. You should go rest in the lounge for a bit. I'm going to try a new medication regimen for tonight. A new regimen? The words alone made the back of my neck tense up. I sat up straight, feigning confusion. A new medicine? Aren't you going to explain it first, doctor? He let out a short, crisp, but fake laugh. Relax. You look exhausted. I don't want you fainting in your own daughter's room. Just go to the lounge. The nurse will call you when we're done. The nurse beside him looked at Riley as if she were a target. My body went hot and cold. This was the moment Mr. Hogan had warned me about. This was the move they were waiting to make. I had to keep playing my part. Okay, doctor, I said quietly as I stood up. I am tired. Kane smiled, satisfied. Good. You need to trust my treatment. I walked out of the room with slow steps, giving the illusion that I was genuinely weary and unsuspicious. But once I was past the door, my pace changed. I walked quickly down the corridor, keeping my head down to avoid drawing attention. The night nurse at the end of the hall looked up, but I kept going, ignoring her gaze. As soon as I reached a quiet corner, a shadow emerged from a side door. "Ma'am, in here," a deep voice whispered. It was Mr. Hogan. Behind him, Dr. Nyla was already standing in her night shift scrubs, her face tense, gloves already on. "We'll watch from the CCTV room," Dr. Nyla said. "Don't worry, ma'am. We're ready." I nodded, the sound of my own breathing echoing in the narrow hallway. We entered the same CCTV room as the night before. The screens showed Riley's room from multiple angles. Dr. Kane stood on the left side of the bed. His nurse prepared a syringe and changed a medication label. I saw something that made my stomach churn. The drug wasn't the same as before, and its color was different. "They've increased the dosage again," Nyla whispered. "That's not standard procedure. It's not even the right medication for her condition." I swallowed hard. "If they give her that, what will happen to Riley?" Dr. Nyla closed her eyes for a second. "Her respiratory system will weaken. Slowly, it will look like a natural complication." She looked at me again. "And that's what they want." I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "Wait," said Arvel from the corner of the room, speaking into his phone. He was sending an electronic report to the Health Foundation. There it is. On the right screen, Riley's door was suddenly opened from the outside. 2 administrative staff members entered, carrying a thick folder with a red stamp. At the same time, another doctor, a member of the ethics committee, rushed in. I held my breath. The scene on the monitor felt like the finale of a plan meticulously orchestrated by my father, by Arvel, by all of us. Kane turned, slightly startled. "What's going on this late at night?" he demanded. The ethics committee doctor opened the folder and presented a letter of appointment. Effective immediately, the case of patient Riley Arden is being transferred to another physician's care. You are temporarily suspended pending an ethics investigation. Kane let out a short laugh. An investigation in the middle of the night? Seriously? The administrative staff member interjected, his voice firm. There are reports of inconsistent medical records. We need access to your manual charts. Kane's face went pale. The nurse beside him froze, not daring to move. I felt my own body go cold. It was happening so fast, so precisely. Suddenly, Arvel glanced at me. Now, ma'am. I clenched my fists and walked quickly back through the rear hallway Mr. Hogan had shown me. When I entered Riley's room, the ethics doctor and the 2 staff members were still there. Kane turned toward me, and his face froze when he saw me. I held up the paper Jared had signed. My voice trembled, not from fear, but from containing the rage I had held back for years. Doctor, starting today, I am no longer the hysterical wife you can all blame. I held the paper out to him. All medical decisions made without my official consent are the full responsibility of my husband, who signed this. Kane reacted instinctively. That's not relevant. Of course it's relevant, Arvel said, entering and closing the door behind me. CCTV footage shows you collaborating with the patient's husband, and now you are performing a procedure without legal consent. Do you understand the consequences? Kane took a half step back, his face as white as a sheet. I looked at his nurse. And you switched medication labels without authorization. It's all on tape. The nurse nearly dropped the tray. Before anyone could speak again, Dr. Nyla entered with a determined expression. From now on, this patient is under my care. Take that medication out of here. The nurse hesitated, but the ethics doctor nodded. The nurse finally complied and left the room. Kane stared at me, his voice almost a growl. Felicity, you don't know what kind of game you've just started. I gave a thin smile. You're wrong, doctor. I know exactly whose game I'm ending. He was about to say something else, but the ethics committee staff took his arm. Doctor, Kane, we need to talk in the administration office. Kane was finally led away, his face that of a man who realized his position had completely collapsed that night. When the door closed, I fell to my knees beside the bed, holding Riley's small hand and crying softly. Not in defeat, but in the knowledge that I had finally reclaimed a piece of my life, of my daughter's life. Arvel patted my shoulder. Ma'am, we're just getting started. Tomorrow, we burn it all down in the boardroom. I nodded, wiping my tears. And on the small monitor beside the bed, Riley's heartbeat slowly became more stable, stronger, for the first time since she had been admitted to the hospital. But before we could feel any relief, my phone suddenly rang. The name on the screen made my skin crawl. It was Jared, with a short message. Tomorrow morning, we need to talk in the director's office. Dawn was breaking, but the long night still felt stuck to my skin. I hadn't slept. I just sat in the corner of the hospital room, watching Riley, who for the first time in 5 days looked a little more peaceful. Her breathing was no longer shallow. Late last night, her body had even moved slightly, as if responding to the correct medication her system truly needed. I stroked her hair gently. Thank God, sweetie, you can finally rest. But before I could savor the quiet moment, my phone rang again. It was Arvel, Mrs. Miller, from now on, I need you to remain calm, because the situation is going to move very quickly, he said as soon as I answered. The foundation and the insurance company have already received last night's report. I stood up, my body tensing reflexively. What was their reaction? Serious, Arvel replied succinctly. The foundation is sending 2 auditors this morning. The insurance company will temporarily block all claims related to Riley's policy. And most importantly, the hospital doesn't want to be dragged down alone. They've been forced to open their doors for an internal audit. I covered my mouth with my hand. Dad, my father really had prepared this path long ago. It was as if he knew that one day I would be standing alone, facing this unbelievable storm. Rapid footsteps echoed from the hallway. Dr. Nyla entered, her face tense but firm. Ma'am, Riley's condition is stable enough for now, she said, checking the monitor. but I'd still like to run one more test to make sure there are no lingering effects from the previous medication." "Do it, doctor," I answered without hesitation. She gave a small smile. "I'm proud of you. It's rare for a mother to stay this calm." I wasn't calm, far from it, but I had to appear capable because the people in this room saw me as Riley's last line of defense. Arvel came in after her, carrying a new folder. "We're beginning phase 2, he said quickly. "Legal action and public opinion. But don't worry, we'll do it subtly." He opened the folder, revealing several documents. "This is the report from the insurance company. They suspect an attempt at claims fraud. This is the report from the Health Foundation regarding Dr. Kane's track record." I read quickly, and my heart sank. There were several cases of pediatric patients with nearly identical patterns. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, even one old case that was deemed mysterious. They all had 3 things in common: a large insurance policy, the same doctor, and sudden complications without clear medical evidence. I closed my eyes, trying to fight off a wave of nausea. This has been going on for years?" I asked quietly. Arvel nodded. "Yes, and you are the first person to come forward with concrete proof." Dr. Nyla added softly, "If we hadn't acted last night, it's very likely that by this morning, Riley would have been in critical condition. I nearly collapsed. The chair behind me was my only support. They were letting children slip into fatal conditions, for money, for policies, for dirty profit." "Sir," I whispered to Arvel, "we have to expose all of it." "We will," Arvel answered curtly. "There's a big meeting in the director's office today. They've summoned Jared, Sandra, Dr. Kane, and you." I froze. They summoned me? Of course. The hospital is terrified of its reputation being ruined. They need to defend themselves in front of the foundation and the insurance company. He straightened his suit jacket. "But they don't know that we already hold all the cards." Hurried footsteps sounded from the hall. Mr. Hogan appeared, his face serious. "Ma'am, I heard from other staff. Kane is panicking. He's trying to contact his people in records to secure the medical charts." I narrowed my eyes. "Can he change the data?" Mr. Hogan shook his head quickly. "Not anymore. The Foundation's auditors have already taken over the central server. All he has are the manual charts, and those were confiscated last night." I let out a small breath of relief. Then Arvel said quietly but firmly, "Mrs. Miller, today is no longer just about saving Riley. That part is almost done." He looked me straight in the eye. "Today, you are going to save many other children who didn't have the same chance Riley did." I was silent. His words hit me like a physical blow, but a blow that finally tore down the dark curtain that had hung over me for years. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. I turned to find Jared standing in the doorway with a strange, panicked expression, accompanied by Sandra, whose face was creased with worry. "Felicity, come on," he said curtly. "We've been summoned by the director. All the important people are gathered. Let's go." Sandra chimed in with a sharp tone. "Don't cause any trouble, Felicity. Remember, we are a family. We have to present a united front." "United?" I almost laughed, a hysterical, bubbling laugh. But I kept my face blank. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll come." Jared immediately turned and walked quickly ahead of me, as if he were still in control. Sandra followed, shooting me a commanding look. Arvel touched my arm gently. "Ma'am, it's time." I nodded. We walked toward the hospital's main conference room. The morning corridors were bustling with activity, but strangely, everyone looked tense, as if sensing a great storm was about to break. When we reached the room, the clear glass doors were closed. Through them, I could see the hospital director, representatives from the foundation and the insurance company, 2 auditors, and Dr. Kane, who was sitting with a pale face. Jared looked anxious. Sandra was trying to appear strong. I clutched the faded folder from my father. Arvel stood right beside me. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, "when you walk in there, their lives will never be the same." I opened the door, and the entire room turned to look at me. It was as if they all knew that the mother they had underestimated was now the most decisive person in that room. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere in the room grew tense, as if the air itself had refused to move. All eyes were on me, not as the weak wife they knew, but as someone who had suddenly seized control without them understanding how. I sat in the offered chair. Arvel stood behind me like a shadow, ready to deflect any attack. Across from me, Jared stared at me with a mixture of panic and anger. "Felicity," he whispered irritably, "please don't make a scene here." I didn't turn. There was no need. The hospital director began the meeting, his voice attempting to sound calm. "Thank you all for coming. This morning, we are joined by representatives from the Health Foundation and the insurance company to discuss a report we received last night." Instantly, Kane sat up straighter. "Director, I think we should." "Dr. Kane." The director cut him off coldly. "We will explain first." Kane fell silent. The Foundation's auditor stepped forward and placed a small screen in the center of the table. He pressed play, and the CCTV footage I had watched last night was now displayed clearly for everyone to see. Jared stood up. "What is the meaning of this?" The director didn't react. The recording's audio filled the room. "I need assurance, doctor. The policy is huge." Jared's face went white. Sandra grabbed her son's arm. "Felicity, what kind of video did you bring? This must be edited." I just let out a soft breath. "Ma'am, that video did not come from me." Arvel stepped forward. "This is from the hospital's internal CCTV system. It's automatically recorded and cannot be edited." The Foundation representative added in a flat tone, "And the recording has its original metadata. There has been no manipulation." Sandra fell silent, her eyes wide, her mouth trembling without a sound. The recording continued, showing the nurse changing the IV label. The sentence that had broken my heart was now perfectly clear. "If you do it slow like this, they'll just think it's a complication." One of the insurance auditors tapped his pen on the table. "This is criminal intent. This is an attempt to manipulate a patient's condition for an insurance claim." Jared shot up in anger. "What is this? You have no proof I was involved." Arvel smiled faintly. "Who said we don't?" He opened a folder. "There's a form you signed yesterday." He placed it in front of Jared. "An admission that you were taking full responsibility for Riley's medical decisions, including the medication regimen administered without the mother's consent." Jared looked like he had stopped breathing, his mouth open but no words coming out. Sandra tried to intervene. "That's just a standard form. He didn't read it. It's a trap." "Correct," Arvel said with a small smile. "It is a trap, but not one I set. You signed it yourself without reading. Your mistake." All eyes were now on the family. The director signaled to a staff member, who then played a second recording, the footage from last night when Dr. Kane tried to administer the dangerous drug before being stopped by the ethics committee. Kane stood up in a panic. This is a setup. I never—" Dr. Nyla entered the meeting at that exact moment, carrying the medical records. "Dr. Kane," she said firmly, "these are your manual medication notes. There are significant discrepancies with the electronic system." She placed them on the table. "And I am willing to testify." Kane sneered in desperation. "You're a new resident. No one will believe you." The director silenced his outburst. "We have already audited 6 previous cases, doctor, and they all show the same pattern." Kane collapsed back into his chair, defeated. The insurance representative then spoke. "With this much evidence, the insurance claim is automatically frozen, and we will be reporting attempted insurance fraud." Jared slammed his hand on the table. "Felicity, say something. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." I looked at him, but not like I used to. I was no longer the wife afraid of losing her marriage. Today, I looked at him as someone who finally understood who the real enemy was. "Jared." My voice was quiet but piercing. "I'm not going to say anything. You did all of this yourself." He staggered back. Sandra clung to his arm, a look of terror on her face I had never seen before. The director continued in a low but clear voice. "On behalf of the hospital management, we apologize to Mrs. Miller and the Arden family for our system's failure. All of Riley's medical expenses will be covered by us until she is fully recovered." I gave a slow nod, but the director wasn't finished. "And we will cooperate fully with the police in this case." Jared stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and fear. "Felicity, you could do this to me? How could you?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm not the cruel one," I said, my voice perfectly calm. You were cruel to your own son. The meeting concluded with major decisions. Kane's medical license was suspended. The nurse involved was placed under investigation. Jared and Sandra were facing reports of attempted fraud and endangerment of a patient. The foundation would conduct a full audit of the hospital. As everyone stood up to leave, Arvel leaned down to me. Phase 2 is complete, ma'am. Now it's time for the final phase, freeing your life. I took a long, deep breath, as if releasing 5 years of burden from my shoulders. I turned my face toward the large glass window where the morning sun was streaming in, but something made me pause. Jared, his face red with fury, looked at me with pure hatred and whispered, so quietly it was almost inaudible, "This isn't over, Felicity. You don't know who's behind me." His words sent a fresh chill down my neck. It wasn't an empty threat. It sounded like someone who truly had another card left to play. Jared's whisper clung to my ears even as I walked out of the conference room. "You don't know who's behind me." The words weren't just a bluff. His tone was too confident, too calm for a man who had just lost everything in the span of an hour. Arvel walked beside me, noticing my expression. "Don't let his words shake you," he said softly. "What does he mean? Who's behind him, Arvel?" I asked without looking at him. "He's just a real estate agent. Who could he possibly have involved in something this big?" Arvel didn't answer immediately. He took a long breath and said, "Sometimes small people have big, unseen friends. But don't worry, we're already several steps ahead." I gazed out the large hospital window. Outside, the world seemed to be moving on as normal. Cars passed, people walked by. But my life had just been shattered and reassembled in a matter of hours. When I returned to Riley's room, I found Dr. Nyla reviewing her latest lab results. "Mrs. Miller," she said, smiling with relief. "Riley is responding well. The previous drugs are out of her system. She's safe now." I exhaled a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for 5 days. "Thank God. Thank you, doctor." "It's not over," she said firmly, "but we are on the right path." Arvel sat in the corner chair. "Ma'am, we begin the legal proceedings today. Divorce filings, custody, criminal charges, and freezing his assets." I nodded. "I want a divorce." My voice was quiet but firm. "And I want full custody. I don't want Riley anywhere near a person like him." Arvel gave a small, satisfied smile at my resolve. "That is the right decision." A few days later, in the divorce court, Jared sat with a face full of anger, yet he tried to appear sympathetic before the judge. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. Felicity has been influenced by outsiders. She's not capable of managing a household." Sandra joined in, crying dramatically. "Your Honor, my granddaughter was near death. It was all because she is so stubborn." I just looked down, but this time not in submission. It was more out of exhaustion from watching their theatrics. The judge looked at them coldly. "Mr. Miller, the CCTV evidence, the hospital report, and the insurance company's report all indicate an attempt at medical manipulation." The judge held up a thick file, and Mrs. Miller's husband was actively involved. "That is an undeniable fact." Jared fell silent. Sandra covered her face with a tissue. Arvel stood up, his voice calm but sharp. "Your Honor, we have also submitted the form signed by Jared Miller, in which he states he assumed full responsibility for the patient's medical decisions. With this evidence, Mrs. Miller is not only innocent, but is the party who protected her child." The judge brought down his gavel. "The court hereby grants the divorce, awards full and sole custody to Felicity Arden, issues a restraining order against Jared Miller and Sandra Miller, and allows the criminal proceedings to move forward based on the reports from the hospital and the insurance company." The room was silent. Jared looked at me with red eyes, not from sadness, but from defeat. Sandra grabbed his arm, crying in despair, but he shook her off. "I don't need your tears, Mom." He looked at me again, this time with a cynical, hateful smile. "You think you won, Felicity?" I didn't answer. There was no need. The judge called the next case. The hearing was over. I stood up slowly, took the folder with the court's decision, and turned to leave. Arvel was beside me, giving a small nod. "Let's go, ma'am." As we passed Jared, he hissed quietly. "You think your father was the only one with connections, Felicity? You have no idea what you've started. This isn't the end." The threat made me pause for a second. But then I smiled faintly without looking at him. "I don't care who's behind you. All that matters is that you are no longer in front of me." I walked out of the courtroom with Arvel. In the distance, I saw Riley being held by the hospital nurse who had faithfully supported us from the beginning. My daughter gave a small smile when she saw me. I stroked her cheek, feeling the warmth that had been almost forcibly stolen from my life. "From now on, sweetie," I whispered, "we're safe." And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt like I could truly breathe again. But as I stepped out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a notification. A text message from an unknown number. "You've touched something that isn't yours. Stop now, or you'll lose more than just a husband." The message made my body freeze, because that threat didn't sound like Jared. This was the voice of another shadow, moving behind the scenes. The message hung on my phone screen, making my skin crawl. The words were short, cold, and too well structured for someone like Jared. "You've touched something that isn't yours. Stop now, or you'll lose more than just a husband." I stared at it for a long time. There was something different about this threat. The tone, the choice of words, the silence behind it, it all felt like it came from someone used to operating in the shadows, not from the mouths of dramatic people like Jared or Sandra. Arvel saw the expression on my face and came closer. "Ma'am, what is it?" I showed him the message. Arvel's gaze turned serious but remained as controlled as ever. "I suspected as much," he muttered. In some of the previous cases, Dr. Kane wasn't working alone. There are certain pharmaceutical companies that often play in dangerous territory. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course. This was all bigger than Jared, bigger than Kane, bigger than anyone at the hospital. There was a large network profiting from vulnerable patients. "But don't worry," Arvel continued in a tone that made me feel supported. "They can't touch you now. The foundation, the insurance company, and the hospital are all on our side. And I've already sent a report to the authorities about potential threats." I clenched the phone, no longer trembling, no longer afraid, just angry. Angry at the reality that I had been living with a man who could sell his own child's life for money and under a system that allowed such things to happen. Mr. Hogan suddenly appeared from behind, slightly out of breath. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say—" I looked at him, and he gave a deep nod, almost like a man who could finally breathe after years of holding his breath. "Thank you for being brave. For not staying silent like I did." I touched his arm. "Sir, you are the one who saved my daughter. If you hadn't shown up that night," our voices both caught. We shared the same wound, the wound of a child lost that he had felt, and the wound of nearly losing a child that I had endured for 5 of the worst nights of my life. "We are both strong," I said softly. "And from today on, no more children will become victims." Mr. Hogan nodded, holding back tears. It was the first time I had seen such a stoic man look so vulnerable. A few months later, the evening air in the garden of my small new house felt warmer, more honest. There were no empty shelves I had to secretly stock, no bills I had to hide from Jared, no arguments behind a closed bedroom door because I was deemed to be failing as a wife. Riley ran around the small garden, laughing as she pushed her favorite toy car. Her voice was more vibrant, her small eyes so much brighter. "Mommy, look at me. I'm so fast." I laughed, a happiness that reached my bones. "Yes, my baby, you're amazing. Doctor." Nyla had said that therapy and additional care would help her make a full recovery. Today, I could see the results. On the back porch, Arvel sat reviewing some files. He had become my partner at a family financial consultancy firm. Not just a work partner, but someone who was present without demanding, without forcing, without any intention of controlling. We weren't rushing to build anything. There was no forced romance, just 2 people who had both fallen and were now maintaining a safe distance. He looked up at me and smiled faintly. "We're getting a lot of calls from new clients. Many families are starting to realize the importance of understanding their policies and medical records. You've become a small inspiration." I sighed. "Not an inspiration. I'm just a mother who didn't want to lose her child." Arvel closed the folder and stood beside me. "That's precisely what makes you strong, Mrs. Miller." I didn't reply. I just watched Riley, who was now pushing her toy car across the grass, laughing freely. A laugh that was almost stolen from us. If I hadn't woken up on that fifth night, the evening breeze brought a slow sense of calm. The tightness in my chest was beginning to dissolve. The television in the living room was on, showing a brief news report in the background. The medical manipulation and insurance fraud case involving a prominent pediatrician continues to develop. Authorities have 4 staff members in custody, while the investigation into other parties is ongoing. I closed my eyes. There was no sense of satisfaction, no desire for revenge, just a feeling of closure. A quiet end, one that didn't demand retribution, just consequences. Soft footsteps came from the direction of the gate. Mr. Hogan arrived in his new uniform. No longer a custodian, but a patient safety officer for the hospital. His rank was new, but his face was the same. "Mrs. Miller," he greeted with a smile. "All of us at the hospital are undergoing new training now. No more dark corners, no more missing records." I smiled. "Thank you, sir." He glanced at Riley, who was laughing freely. "It's good to see her so healthy. My son didn't get a chance like this." I touched his shoulder again. "Now, many other children will have that chance because of you." He gave a small nod and left, leaving behind footprints of dignity that had once been stolen by the system. I sat on the porch chair, hugging my knees and looking up at the sky. The orange hue of the sunset stretched gently, unlike the dim hospital lights that once haunted my nights. I remembered that fifth night again, when a humble custodian approached me and said, "Starting tomorrow, ma'am, you shouldn't be the one watching your son anymore. Come, let me show you something." The sentence that changed everything. I looked up at the sky, imagining my father there. I knew he must be watching us. I knew he must be proud that I was no longer silent, no longer submissive, no longer letting others dictate my life. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "Thank you for leaving me a legacy worth more than money." Courage. Riley ran toward me and hugged my legs. "Mommy, play with me." I laughed and stroked her hair. "Of course, sweetie." I stood up and took her hand. And for the first time, I stepped into the future without fear. Because I now knew one thing for certain. When a mother rises, there is no power in the world that can trifle with her child's life for money again.